the central organization for the internet. I think we're live across all the fashions and forms.
By the way,
Jerry,
did you notice? Did you notice? By the way, my soccer tan from my Oakleys. Look at that.
That's basically just like if you're wearing white New Balances, that particular tan happens year round at this point. It's part of
I have two pairs of white New Balances. I'm all dad shoed up, by the way.
And so,
yeah, absolutely.
That's just kind of a consequence of your circumstances.
I never would have imagined, by the way, Phil, that would have happened to me in February, by the way. I was totally stunned to get sunburned Saturday.
Hey,
and how we've gone from 27 degrees to sunshine.
Sunday in Georgia, I think here just to the southwest of Atlanta, the high is supposed to be 80.
It's supposed to be up to 70 today.
Yeah.
By the way, I knew it was warm Sunday when I flipped on your video and you were in a shirt and tie and no sweater. It's like, wow, it's warmed up in Atlanta. Look at that.
I will state two facts. Number one, that was the second time I have worn a tie in 12 months.
Yeah. I was kind of disappointed in that, by the way. I was like, what is he doing? He's ruining it for the rest of us.
The first time was in a gospel meeting because there was a number of members on the West Coast who were still, the meeting was actually a virtual study opportunity. And some of them hadn't been able to assemble with their brethren in person for so long. And they were dressing in their suits at home live. And I was like, brother, last night of this meeting, I'm doing that too. So I tied up.
Dude, if you were sitting down, they were lucky you weren't wearing shorts. Let's be honest.
Going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, the old newscaster trick.
The second point there was I did not select that outfit for myself.
Dress from here up.
My attire consultant suggested and encouraged me to do so. And
for those who know, Jill told him to wear a tie.
Yeah. And I did because that's what you do.
It's do the work. Let's just be honest. Jill was afraid they weren't going to mail the check if you didn't wear a tie on the last night.
Yeah. Jill also, Michael West commented that Sunday morning, this past Sunday morning when he saw me in the parking lot. He's like, dude, when did we change the dress code? I'm like,
yes.
So that's the back.
Hal says it's a great day when he realized he could preach without a tie and not be excommunicated. And I'm just going to say, Hal, not true everywhere. Not true everywhere.
Hey, you've got to make sure you fit the culture of the community in which you're connected. And so you've got to balance those things out.
Culture-driven church. That's a new book we could write.
Yeah. So before we get into our primary topic for today, which, by the way, is going to be discussing the relationship of a local church and its participants and the process of connecting to an internee or an intern in that setting, I got a quick question for Terry.
Okay.
So it's a simple one. That kind of.
I'm a simple man.
Yeah. At what point did this transformation take place that you were wearing these New Balance dad shoes and you embraced it? How long did you fight it? How long did you resist?
Okay, so backstory, real quick.
Okay, just short form answer, please.
Oh, well, there's a guy here who married one of our girls. We has obeyed the gospel and all that, came a brother in Christ here, and all this. He works at the New Balance store, so I need to backload this by saying that I have the friends and family discount at New Balance. So, dude, those crispy white boys that New Balance makes, or the Nike Monarchs, there's more than one version of the New Balance, by the way, for those who don't know, but white leather that you keep bright white, that you eventually, when they get old, mow the yard in. Those shoes, that's what we're talking about. I've seen those on Instagram, the jokes. You and I have, I think, both follow classic Dav moves. Like that's 80% of what they do is these shoes. So I started joking around with my kids that I was going to do that. And last fall in soccer season, I bought them almost solely to wear to soccer tournaments and embarrass my child.
The things you have done to embarrass your children. Soccer show up with the crispy whites seems like kind of not that much of a step.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. They're really comfortable. That's why they're still making those. They are really, like, I bought shoes for what they look like, but they are extremely comfortable. And so then I just bought another pair that aren't like the traditional crispy white boys, but they're kind of related. They're the classic, I forget the number, but usually they're in gray suede for the New Balances, like 957s or whatever. It's not the 954s, but anyways, it's the really classic ones. They have them in white with red and blue trim, and I bought a pair because they are amazing and really comfortable. By the way, I knew I was old, Phil, when I quit wearing Nikes, and my closet is all New Balance right now. Like, that's when I knew I was old.
Yeah, so I do have one pair of, just to answer the question on my own behalf, I do have one pair of New Balance tennis shoes. They are not crispy whites. They are supremely comfortable. They weren't initially, but they have kind of settled in to be some great shoes. But I will stipulate that I begrudgingly still drive a minivan. It's not by choice. These things are all foisted upon me by the powers that be and the circumstances surrounding me. So I'm still fighting the fight. There's a certain level of dad embracement. And
I don't know if you can see this, by the way. Look at this. Hold on. Those are New Balances.
Those are all right.
Those are like New Balance dress shoes. You talking about comfy, buddy. Those are fantastic.
I'm going to give those a look.
Yeah.
I am looking at another pair of day-to-day shoes. They may be some classic Adidas Sambas, the classic indoor soccer shoes. They might be a set of Cole Haan.
Dude, I have a pair of Adidas Sambas, but I will mimic Shane here. The Adidas Sambas, like the classic black with white trim, right? I got a pair of those. Mm-hmm. There is no support for a big guy in those shoes at all. Like, none. And you can't take the insoles out to put the insoles in. Yeah. So
sorry, you've involved in a shoe talk all of a sudden.
I'm just telling you that, the older I get, the more stability, reliability, and comfort is greater than looks. And final thing, because we need to move on to this. I mean, we could talk about shoes forever if you wanted to. Like, I've got 13 pairs of dress shoes. It's like a thing. Invest in a good pair of insoles too. I'm just telling you, you can make any shoes work. Yes, Shane, soul winning. Yes, fantastic. Shane Scott is my boy today.
Yeah, sub-blog.
Yes,
that's a sub blog. Yes, our major blog. Do the work in soul winning. All right, so let's get to the heart of the matter. I think this can be a concise but important conversation. This is the time of the year in some
This is where the rubber meets the road, the feet meet the pavement, the shoes do the work. Yeah.
We got a lot of classic dad puns that can cross over the street. We can beat feet this way. So here's the thing. This is a time frame for a lot of congregations, a lot of evangelists, and a lot of young men who are interested in evangelistic work that they start thinking about, hey, is this a time where I should do an internship with a congregation, look for a mentor evangelistically, try to build a formal commitment for, let's just say, the summer. And we'll try to use very simple terms, although some of these programs may be a couple of years down the road, just have longer programs. Some places do them in different things, but really we're kind of talking about not the program itself anymore. That's a separate thing.
That's another episode we did.
Right. What we're talking about is the conversational process that builds that relationship. And I want to think about it, at least from my perspective. I use this in part as an introduction to Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3 this Sunday, that these conversations should help you see the church in a more close way, much like those letters to the churches give us a close look, because you're kind of doing this weird blind date adoption interview in those conversations, whether you're an intern or maybe coming in to work with a group as an evangelist or a member who moves into the area, because there's so much you don't know. And yet you're going to entrust yourself to the leadership within the confines of this body of believers. And so I think it's really good then to think through, like we did last week in Park, we talked about questions on accountability and leadership, to build some good discussion models, and to think through what are some problems that have occurred in the past, what are some challenges that would be on the table in the future, and how do we go about that? And so, Terry, I know that you've done some of these more formal arrangements. Let's start with the kind of the table topics things, or what are some important things to think about?
Well, yeah. So I think one of the things when you're looking for an intern and you're looking for a place to go, and it's a formal arrangement, especially Phil, I think one of the most important things to realize is it has to be a good fit or it's miserable for everybody. Mm-hmm. And the only way to make sure you know that that's a good fit is to really do a good job from both sides of discussing what your expectations are before you get there. And every bad internship I know of, both personally and that I've heard stories of, always gets tied back to the fact that there was a misunderstanding of expectations and even the process of what would happen before it ever started. And I only have really one probably personal experience with that, which in the interview process, I guess I thought I made things clear, but apparently not. And let me say that was cleared up, by the way, for both of us by the time it was over with. But that's why this is so important. So if you're on the other end, and really, Phil, I think this begins, I don't want to get into all the ins and outs, but you also got to know exactly what you're looking for, mm-hmm. right? Like, I know one guy that wouldn't work with anybody that wasn't at least a sophomore in college. Mm-hmm. He just didn't want to deal with anybody younger than that. Okay. And that's good to know. Like that's good to know. So you need to know that. You need to, the church needs to know what they're looking for. What are your expectations? Do you want this person just to preach? Do you want them to teach class? Do you want them to be involved socially? And there should not be any hidden expectations. So the interview process, if you're the guy going in, you need to ask those questions. What are my social requirements? What are my preaching requirements? How often will I preach? What does my week look like? Am I expected to be a de facto youth minister? Reason I ask that, by the way, is because a lot of places kind of think that during the summer but aren't open about it. So you got to ask that question, right?
Right. And there's a couple of layers of questions, or maybe just areas of questions. Terry's talking about the structure of the event, like from the internee coming in, who's going to be doing this work. What will those parameters look like? But I also think it's important to pay attention to what kind of relationship do they want to build with you short-term, long run.
Oh, yeah.
Are they looking to use you as a tool? Totally fine, as long as that's upfront. If they're going to use you as a kind of like, we want you to help our congregation for 3 months, 5 months doing this, that's totally fine. If it's on the table upfront, you know that going into it, that's great. But if that's what they want, make sure you know that that's going in. But you also want to realize that, look, you're building a relationship that could potentially benefit everybody for the next 30, 50 years.
Well, this is very much kingdom work, Phil. That's what you got to view this as. This is kingdom work, right? Yeah. You're sending little Timothy and Titus's out into the world, hopefully. That's how you view this from the preacher and / I guess host church. I don't know what you want to call that.
Right.
That relationship should be long term. I still sometimes talk to the guy I worked at my internship with.
Yeah.
And you want that. And if that's not intended, that's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, and Hal has a question that we'll get to in a little bit. I also want to point it out to you how we saw your question, and we'll catch it here in just a bit. So you have that first bracket of concerns, like, okay, what's the structure?
And by the way, part of what you talk about relationship is not just the preacher. What about the relationship with the elders in the intern? Like, right. What is that going to look like? What's the interaction going to be? I think that's important too.
And look, there's going to be a lot of parameters that go into this because some internship settings there might be no elders there. And it's really just going to be
Yeah.
you and the evangelist with a high quantity of time. Those are great for some reasons. It may be you, the evangelist, and his family. Those are good for other reasons, but they may not have
Yeah.
the great value you're looking for. They may not be helpful. Like you may not get much good out of it. There may be other things too. Here's some other things to think about. Thing number one is to really figure out, why do you want to do it on the intern level? Like what's driving you to this purpose? Sometimes I think the answer is either I want to preach or I think I want to preach.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a bad answer, but it can be richer than that. Like you can have a fuller perspective. And it kind of connects a little bit to Hal's point as well in a second.
Yeah. In regards to that, Phil, I think one of the things to keep in mind is the church needs to understand which of those two things you just said they're okay with.
Right.
Like and the preacher that's going to be the mentor. You know, there's some guys that they're not okay with, I think I want to preach. They only want to work with a guy who knows he wants to preach. Okay? And at the same time, there's some people, and I was one of these, that, hey, I would like that, but this is the perfect time for you to figure out if this is what you want to do. And by the way, for those who don't know, like what you see if you have an intern, what you see happening in the pulpit on Sunday is like less than 10% of what that guy's doing.
Right.
And it's less than 10% of the work. And so it allows somebody who's thinking this may be where I want to go to really see behind the curtain about what this really looks like. And so the church needs to understand. Now, there's a third person in there, by the way, that you got to mention, which is there's some guys that just want to do a summer internship because it's an easy way to get a summer job. And if that's you and you're not really interested in preaching, then don't take that from somebody else who is. Okay?
Be open with what your goals are.
Yeah.
And I include in these brackets, and this is where I would connect it to Hal's thing. His question is, at what point does surrendering the pulpit and teaching time to a novice become more of a problem to the church than a blessing? I would say that's not just an intern context. It's a general context, but there's tons of venues where a person can develop the kind of experience they need to then step from one teaching platform to more visible ones in the future. And so we do this in Bible classes where someone co-teaches early on, and then eventually the co-teacher becomes the lead teacher and the former lead teacher becomes the co-teacher. And then we kind of ease them into that process. There's tons of secondary opportunities where you can balance that out. And so that's going to be congregational judgment time. Like what's best for us might not be best for another group. And we do that with new converts. We do that with maturing men. We want to see their aptitude to teach. Like the answer to that comes on an elastic scale. And you're not going to certainly give him every single Sunday in the summer. You're going to preach every Sunday all summer long, but he may produce sermons all summer long.
Yeah. So
things.
Yeah, that just depends on your structure. Because when I did it, we had 2 sermons every Sunday. And he did preach every Sunday.
Right.
And I think one of the things to point out about this is that this gets into the structure a little bit, but it also gets into kind of the way we view this. If an internship is done correctly, there is not a novice stepping into the pulpit. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, by the time that guy gets up in the pulpit, it is my job as the mentor to make sure his material is ready to be presented in such a way that it's not novice level. When you mentioned writing a sermon a week, our guys wrote a sermon a week, but that was over about, at least the actual writing phase was well over 2 days, and a lot of review and a lot of sometimes me going back and saying, start over. None of this is good.
Right.
So there's a responsibility not to let that happen. The benefit is, I can tell you from experience, and I think, Phil, you've seen this too, man, there's nothing quite as encouraging to a church to watch the development of that guy and be a process of it over a period of time. Yep. And to see that they've played a role, and then to send that guy out and to see him go out into the kingdom and preach for years and to get reports back, that has a long lasting impact on a congregation to the good. And so I'm just going to say, to me, that's never been a question, just because he may be a novice in experience and opportunity, but he's going to be prepared well above novice level, or I'm not going to let him go up in the pulpit. That's what's going to happen. And that's my job as the guy that's running the program.
During the years I was with the church at Jerry Whitson Road, I'll use this as an illustration. We had a ton of young guys who started their first opportunities to truly preach Sunday sermons with us. And they would go for other degree programs, work with me, in our in-person classes on the campus, and then go graduate, go do stuff. But one of the best things that we did was start a end of summer, beginning of the school year congregational singing that included inviting one of those guys back to be the primary speaker at the close of that event. And what that did was it gave the congregation a chance to see a guy. They saw him as a college kid. They saw him as a young man. Now they saw him as a growing disciple who came back to encourage others. And that was tremendously valuable to the young man, to the men who were there right now, to the ladies who were there right now, like the young ladies and young men. They saw this potential, and then the circle gets closed. All of those young guys who were part of that process matured in tremendous ways, and that in the end produced the relationship that we need. I think I'll look at Chris's comment in a second. I kind of skimmed it. I think there's some great value there too. And there's some, it's congregationally dependent. Not every congregation has the same local demographics, is my short answer, but I'll expand it a little bit more. But that's a value opportunity. Like, okay, now you built that value into it. And so as an intern, you want to look and say, what kind of relationship do you expect to have with the men who work with you 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And what does that look like? And so as much as you might ask a prior intern who was there 1 or 2 years ago, find someone who was there 10 years ago and say, hey, what'd you gain out of that program? What can I prepare myself with to value and get the best value out of this summer opportunity spiritually, independent of what my life plans are? Maybe I think I might want to preach. Maybe I think I want to be a kingdom leader. Both valuable things that internships can participate in, and move into that well.
Yeah, I'll use an example of one of my interns. He ended up not preaching. And it's funny because I've known him all his life, or most of his life. He was my ring bearer at my wedding, Luke Adams. He's been on the program with us about marketing and so forth. Luke preached with me for a summer. He did some other internships. Ultimately, he decided he wanted to go into public relations and marketing. But to this day, Luke and I on a regular basis talk, and I still, on some areas, mentor Luke. And in some areas, Luke helps me. And that's, you need to understand, when you enter into an internship, it's probably going to happen if it's done well. You're going to develop a relationship with that guy, whether you're the mentor, whether you're the intern. You're going to develop a relationship that lasts for a really long time. Yeah. And that is one of the benefits of that, and I think it's a good thing. Chris's take about why are we paying kids and why not just use men at the local church? And my answer to that, Chris, is why can't we do both?
That was going to be my answer.
Yeah. I got a young man that is getting ready to move to the area that I live in, that actually I helped teach, and he's in high school, and he's graduated college. He's done some other stuff, and I think he's been on a program with us, Keith Maddox. Keith Maddox is working a secular job, plans on being involved in really preaching kind of work, even though he doesn't need the income. He wants to do that. Keith never went through a formal training program, but he was mentored by me and another guy at the church he was at, and we did a lot of training class stuff. And constantly we're telling Keith, you have a gift you cannot bury regardless what you do in your life. So you can do both. I do think there comes a time, personally, where a guy that's been mentored even through high school needs this as an opportunity to help him kind of leap off the ledge, if you will, full blown, and maybe develop those talents and school skills. And I think not only should it be why can't we do both, but I think we need both. And I would also say there's no reason your intern can't be one of those local kids to enter into a more formal, regular kind of thing. Yeah. That then lets him go to the next step. And if you do that, where this kid's coming in the office 4 days a week or 5 days a week and preaching every week or writing a sermon every week, why would you not pay him to do that and support him in that? So I think, yes, we need to mentor those guys. We also need this for that next step, because there's more than, you don't go from, hey, I was allowed to do Wednesday night invitations to I'm ready to preach full time. There's some training in there. Where does that training come from? And if you can do that for your guys, Chris, and I know you can, and they're willing to do that unpaid, that's fantastic. What about the guys who don't have a Chris Emerson who's not willing to do that, which is the other question? Right. They need this opportunity as well.
And let me think about it this way. There's a mentorship should be happening at the local church level across the spectrum of discipleship. People who are engaged in any kind of normal business practice should be mentoring the other believers that are younger than them in that group on the reg. Like, that should already be taking place. And so that culture should exist amongst the believers, where the young disciples spend valuable time with older disciples to build spiritual bonds that will help them, just like preachers get helped by older preacher, younger preacher relationships. But let me connect it into maybe a different context. Say we've got an environment where Chris Emerson is successful to his highest degree, and he's created kind of a culture of commitment amongst the young people in that congregation to participate in these mentoring opportunities. That is a valuable opportunity for someone like what Reagan is talking about.
Right.
You've got this setting where all these effective young men. How much better can the visiting young guy be because of the positive peer pressure of being around young people like that? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with the laborer receiving wages who happens to be a child of one of the members there locally. Like, correct. You can pay those local guys. I just want to now, should you or would they accept it, or do they need it? Those are entirely separate basket of decisions. But if you approach that conversation in a more holistic way, when you bring in that other guy, nobody's offended because everything's on the table. And so there's no offense there. Further, you narrow down those expectations. Look, no, we're not expecting this young guy who comes in for the summer to be displacing this work. We're expecting him to augment the work and be a larger participant in it. And maybe in a context what Chris has described, that's a place where the guy needs to come in for 1 to 2 years rather than a summer. But he gets that powerful peer bump that comes from, hey, here's 13 young men, if you've got that in your group, who are all going to spiritually surround me on a regular basis, offer peer feedback, because peer feedback is sometimes better than mentor feedback. And so there's some value there that needs to be explored, that balance.
Yeah, and to follow, Chris said he found that the church expects the trainee to do what the young men there could be doing. And I'm just going to tell you, that's never the case in my training programs, because the things I'm having the trainee doing, it's 50 to 60 hours a week, quite honestly, for those 3 months. It's a lot of assignments. It's a lot of things that may be good for some of our young men to do occasionally. But if they're going to do it at that level for that long, we had better support them, because those guys can't afford to do that without some support, because most of our young guys were working. And I'm not trying to be combative. I'm just saying I think both is there. I think there's both. I think we mentor young guys along the way. We get them up to speak. We coach them in that. We work with them, and we try to get them to do that. But there also comes a time and place where we go, okay, if you're going to go to the next level, you need a little bit more really intensive kind of work. I'll use my own son as a kind of example of that. He's never been afraid of anything. And over the years, we have used him, and I have pushed him. He's led singing. He spoke. He's been a last-minute invitation giver because I forced him into that. But when it came time for him to think about doing this full-time, I sent him somewhere else because it's not good to work for dad, okay? And at that point, it allows him to see things differently. But I know that the expectations of that internship made it almost impossible for him to have a job to help kind of save money that he needed to go back to school in that sense. So, the money thing, I think we need to be cautious about that. Like you said, if we're pushing these guys to this level where it's their full-time job, they have a right to be supported for that time period as if it's their full-time job. And I just think that's important. But and a lot of that depends on the structure of the program. A lot of that depends on that.
Reagan makes a closing comment in this context, and we'll try to shift it into a couple other points of dialogue. Wayne Fancher trying to kill me. I like Wayne. That's really part of the importance of a serious program should involve a serious commitment and a serious amount of work. Because the work of an evangelist is a serious task. Hey, look, this is how it has to be. It doesn't mean that it's just about hard work. But whatever work you're doing, it does need to have that level of discipline to it. So,
and that's a key. So to get back to the interview thing, you need to be able to adequately communicate how is the discipline thing going to work, right? Look, there's a variety of different internships. There's internships like what apparently Fancher ran, what I ran, that it was like boot camp for 3 months. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. If I thought you were getting by, that you were smart enough to do less than what I, do it in a lower amount of time, I was going to give you more stuff. Yeah. Like there was a guy who's moved close to me now, Greg. Greg was one of my internships. And in his interview, Greg says to me, "You cannot outwork me." And I was like, challenge accepted, dude. Yeah. Like, that's the dumbest thing you could have said. That was the first year we had a research paper in the middle of our internship. I mean, because if you tell me, oh, you can't give me too much work, watch me. Don't challenge me that way. And it's not being mean. I'm going to tell you what that does. It really develops the discipline. Like you said, that's a huge part of this. But you need to talk about that. How are you going to do that? What is the plan for that? Right. That's a big deal.
In those conversations, again, now going forward, that's something you shouldn't do as the intern coming into it. Say you need to be a little bit of wisdom there and kind of go with the under promise, over deliver space and let them figure out, because they're going to figure it out, like what your capacity is, and all of those things kind of have to be balanced out in each of these things. How are we going to build a relationship? How are we going to invest the time? Chris talks about how is someone who has a family like a bunch of us do going to balance all that out? You're bringing someone beside you. And so a lot of it is like, okay, here's my book, here's your book, we're going to work.
You're shadowing me a lot of the time.
Right. And so honestly, some of that is part of those things. And some of it is learning to develop the independent drive to do a task, because I don't have to watch a guy dig a ditch to evaluate the quality of the ditch later. I can give them parameters and say, okay, here's the guy line. It's going to go straight down this way. I'm going to need you to terminate at this point. I can do all that. And then afterwards come back and evaluate it. Boom. Set it.
Dude. Yeah. And listen, it is more work. Like it is easier not to have an intern. Like I think that needs to be thrown out there.
You're shifting your workload around. You're not like, okay, he's going to preach X number of sermons. Well, you're going to help him prepare those sermons. So you'll probably spend an equal amount of time doing that, if not more, fact checking and detailing out that. But in the kingdom, there's great value.
Correct.
My frank opinion is we need more of them. They need to be more rigorous. They don't need to be preacher schools. They need to exist at different points in the development process. And they should be available to a larger spectrum of young men, because we don't just need preachers. We need kingdom leaders. And public teaching, public speaking, public interaction is a tiny facet of what should be taking place in these programs. And so we really need to invest more in the development, like Chris is talking, on the congregational level, but also structurally in the families of God that we're connected to.
Yeah, and I think Chris misunderstands like my approach. I'm not giving them 40 hours of collegiate training. I'm giving them an hour to an hour and a half a day of one-on-one, and the rest of the time they're in their office, which is not my office, with assignments that they better have in on time. and they come back in, and then we evaluate their work. And a lot of times they go back to their office after I get their work because it is not what it should be. Right. It's not me sitting and teaching 40 hours of classwork to them. It is them doing the work with some direct supervision. And I think that leads us to another really important thing to clarify, Phil, which is who is in charge of this internship? Like, that's a big thing in the interview that needs to be determined. If you come to a place like where I was at and there's 2 preachers, multiple elders, who's the voice that you have to pay attention to? Who's in charge? And listen, for me, when in the internships where I was at, even though I had another preacher and we had elders, I was the voice, and everything else, if they had something, it came through me. And I was the one, and they were told, you don't pay attention to anybody else but Terry, by the elders. That was the agreement. I'm the voice. I'm the one that filters all of the things and lets you know, this is what I want you to pay attention to. Because sometimes an internship can have too many cooks in the kitchen, and it makes a mess. Now, we talked about in our structure, one of the things we did was we did member evaluations. The other preacher did an evaluation. I got all those evaluation forms, but then I turned around and I shared those evaluations with my voice and my instruction. And I might look at that and go, hey, he said this. I don't agree with that. Don't pay attention to it. And so that's structure, but it's also interview, Phil. You got to know who's in charge. You go somewhere where there's 10 hats in the room, which hat do you pay attention to? That's really important.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of that stuff that we really pay close attention to in the sense of, on the church's side, how do we plan this? On the evangelist / intern side, how do I understand it? And then everybody, how do I apply it? Because it requires discipline. If you've got an elder and he's like, I got some good advice, but the guy is working with the evangelist, you got to have that conversation. That means that elder has to go, hey, I need to talk to the intern. This is what I want to say. Do you need to say this, or do I need to say this? And the answer may come back, no, elder, you need to say that because it needs to come from you. Or it could be, no, I should say that. And you guys work it out. Like, there's a real need for structure in a lot of these things that has to be thought of before you step into the role. Let me add one more thing. There's always going to be an opportunity for individual failure in these spaces. An intern may fail. An evangelist may fail. The elders may fail in any of these parts. And you can most certainly see those failures play out in private or in very big public ways. There needs to be a plan for that too. And maybe you don't discuss it, but like, hey, look, you understand, like if you start behaving poorly, you don't show up when you're expected, you miss an interview appointment, as Edwin kind of shot fired about some other setting or individual that I'm unaware of. In the end, this is what's going to happen. Like, we may send you home. And if the elders or the evangelist has issues, like I know of instances where an intern had to take over the preaching responsibilities because the evangelist's life was not in step with his preaching. And the evangelist was let go. And all of a sudden, the intern is like, I'm now the summer preacher. I didn't plan to do this. Elders need a plan for those kind of things.
I got a friend that was in a 2-year program that one preacher left. He became the full-time preacher for over a year. Then he became an intern for the last 6 months. That's awkward, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you got to figure some of that stuff out, and you got to have those kind of discussions. And everybody just ignore the Chris Emerson, Evan Crozier discussion going on the side.
That's a sidebar. Yeah, let them go.
Yeah.
I think also it's important for us to kind of shift a little bit. Most preachers have a list of questions that they like to ask or suggest people think about in regards to negotiating these conversations. And I've got my own list, and Terry probably has his own list. There may be some crossover. I want to ask 2 questions of the audience here. If you've done an internship or have it, if you're aware of them, what single question would be the most important question you would want to ask? And what thing did you wish you would have asked about ahead of time? And so, like, those are 2 separate questions, though similar. First one is like, hey, I should have asked this question, or like, this is the question everyone should ask. It's the most important one. And the second one is, hey, this is the question I should have asked, but didn't know that this is a thing that should be asked about. Terry, I'll let you answer that one too first while people are typing in. Philip's questions are too obtuse and weird, and I'll do what I want anyway. That's basically how the chat goes any point. But what you got? What's the one question an intern should ask?
The one question that an intern should ask? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's difficult for me since it's been 25 years since I was in that seat.
Edwin's got one answer for us, but I've got an answer.
Yeah. Well, I think the one question may be, what, for me as an intern, I would want to know what is our direct personal interaction going to look like.
Yeah.
I think that's a big deal. There's a lot of questions that could be asked, but I think it's really important. What's our direct interaction going to look like? Anyway.
Yep. And so I'll give mine first, and then I think there's a couple of great comments to add into.
Reagan has a great one.
Hey, why are you having an intern?
Yeah, that's a good one too. Because if you're going to ask me, and look, as the intern hiree interviewer, I'm going to say, why do you want to be an intern? Like, that's the one question I'm going to ask. I want to know why you're here. Why are you here?
Yeah.
No, Chris, you did not get Fridays off.
Yeah, no. Especially if that's when the discount tea times are. I have no idea when they are, so I have no comment to that at this point in life. So some of the great answers so far on this first question set. Edwin says, do you have a personal devotional habit? A question for an intern. An intern to those interviewing. What are the clear expectations for my role?
Yeah.
Hal reframed it in his own words. What are your expectations of me? And be specific.
And we talked about that in the structure, by the way. I would hope that that's all clearly laid out. You know, even before you get to the interview, I think I said then I had like a 4-page outline of this is what it's going to look like. That was already off the table. Again, that goes back to structure, but a lot of that should be handled before you even sit down. You would hope.
Right. I think kind of pulling in some other stuff is to think about this way. The social expectation side is a big surprise zone. And let me give you an illustration that's really easy. At the age that most guys end up doing internship is also the age when a lot of their friends are going to get married. Like, it just is. And so a lot of those guys are like, hey, man, I want to go to my buddy's wedding. How do you coordinate that? I know from a personal standpoint, cases where that was a very stressful negotiation with a local church because it wasn't properly disclosed ahead of time. And
that's got to be part of the interview process. And if your buddy gets engaged after that and gets married in 2 months, then your buddy just is not going to see you more than likely.
Right.
I mean, and that's not meant to be ugly, but you know, you can go to an internship and have a day off here or there. You can't miss 4 weekends out of 13 because your buddies are getting married. You can't get back in time. So, you know, that again, and Emerson, I just hate to tell you this, bud, but if you were applying to be an intern with me, you would be leaving your golf clubs at home.
You just broke his heart.
Yeah.
Isn't that what preachers do?
You know, you bring up the social interaction stuff. Like, one of the things that's very clear in our internship when we did it was you're going to spend 2 nights a week with some member of the household in their home.
Right.
And you're gonna be in their home for a couple of hours eating with them, and you need to be prepared for that. And that means you're not going to be on your PlayStation. You're not going to be on your phone. You're going to leave your phone in your pocket. You're going to get to know these families. So, you know, those kind of things need to be clear too. So those are great questions.
Yeah. So I think that's like a great starting point. Like, those surprise events are going to happen. You know, and hey, Chris, you got that 150 question Bible survey thing. Post your link, bro. I'll tie it together. There was an article that Steve Wolfgang has posted a couple different times. I saw it a couple days ago, where as a history professor, he would often survey his incoming students to determine their gaps. And when you do that, you find out that a lot of folks have big gaps in their historical knowledge. They've got, a mix up of actors being Roman senators or Roman, emperors. You've got fact issues with where things are located, all of that stuff. That's all of us. It's not just preachers. And so learning to fill in those gaps is an important part of the process. And it can be surprising at times. Again, it falls into this, hey, here's some expectations, here's some structures. And so I would actually also, like I said, that social question would be one that I would ask from the intern side, but also from the congregation side. Be mindful of that. Those relations are important to that young man's life.
Yeah.
They may involve things of any number of commitments already. Find a way to be flexible in that. You've got a good program. You don't necessarily need to be a warden to a state penitentiary to be working with an intern. You're trying to build a relationship that is long lasting. And so in that, give some space. Give some space for like, hey, you go to a wedding? Okay, this is what that's going to look like. It would look like it would just be for me. I mean, you're going to work extra before or afterwards.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is like, it looks exactly like it looks like for the preacher. Okay, so this guy's wedding's on Friday night. It's 6 hours away. Yeah. I'm not going to be there Monday, but guess who is now? You are. Yeah. Right? Because that's what happens. If I'm going to miss several days, then I work ahead, I work after, I fill in the gaps. You do that. Like if it's an internship, again, this is not a college course. You're helping them see this is what the work really looks like. You got to go out of town, you still got to do the work. You coming back late Saturday night, you better be ready to preach Sunday because that's how it is for me. And you want to pattern all of this with real life applications. Like one of the things I always did too was we had stuff going on at church, unless it was a really personal matter. We let them know about that. That's what the work looks like. That's what it looks like. So the internship is not about learning, let's say, the history and geography of the Old Testament while you're with me. Like I'm going to expect you to do the same thing I do, which is do that on your own. My job is to teach you how to write a sermon, how to write an article, how to do PowerPoint, how to present it, how to build relationships, how to manage conflict, all those kind of things. That's the day-to-day work. That's what we're going to focus on, okay? And what you're talking about with the timing and scheduling, that's part of a personal conflict that you've got to figure out how to fulfill. Yeah. So you make them come up. Hey, some kid comes to me and goes, hey, I need to be out of town for 3 days next week. You come tell me what that looks like because you're still preaching on Sunday. How are you going to make that work?
Yeah, all that stuff is you got to figure it out. Yep. So Edwin has one great kind of comment we can use to step into our close. He talked about one of the things he wanted as an intern, help with personal evangelism. It didn't necessarily connect in the internships that he did. Hey, that's the thing to work on. If you're hosting one of these programs, if you're a young guy going into it, that's a great question because that's an area where I think churches can do better. Every congregation that's been a growing congregation has had non-preachers in it who are often as skilled, if not better skilled, at reaching out to people who were spiritually in that flux space between, do I want to become closer to God? Those are actually probably the best people to sit that guy around, that young guy. And if the evangelist himself is exceptionally talented in that area, you should be shifting the dynamic of your program to lean into that strength. So those are steps that I think are super important there. Absolutely really should be added and thought through on a healthy way. Sure. All right, so that's about our scheduled time for today. Terry, do you have any last comments? That we want to include as we close out for this afternoon?
Well, in a couple of weeks, we're going to set up a grudge match between Chris Emerson and Evan Crozier on Second Preacher Arrangements, and we'll just let you stay tuned for that. But outside of that,
I think Reagan wants to tap in on that one too. Maybe a tag team event.
Maybe it's a tag team. We get maybe it's just a battle royale instead of a tag team. We'll throw Edwin in there, Reagan in there. We'll throw Chris in there. I'll hop in the ring and clean it up. And
I think we'll arrange a
referee.
A group Zoom. I'll send the email.
Yeah, group Zoom. Be great.
Yeah. We'll do that in a couple of weeks. Hey, thanks everybody for your participation. We love your questions and your comments. Looking forward to each of the future weeks as the kind of the whole country opens up and blooms into early spring with the rise in temperatures, Chris, that means that maybe the golf courses will change colors for you. I don't know what kind of grass you got around you, but it's probably brown. It'll turn green eventually.
By the way, did you realize when Chris said, "How are you doing this? How do you have time?" What he meant was, that's really going to damage my golf game. I can't dedicate that much time. That's what Chris really meant. I can't give up my tee times for an intern. Let's not forget about the ski slope. I mean, I'm going to hit Chris in both kneecaps at this point.
Thing. But if we can be encouragement to you in work, and including that means gentle, loving conflict, then we are happy to do so. And so, again, signing off for this week, may God be a blessing to you. May our work be a blessing to you. And if we can help you in some way,